It's unbelievable in a humane society that this type of sweeping mandate would be imposed upon prosecutors in criminal cases in Louisiana. And that's exactly what this bill does. And it does it, Danielle, for any felony, not just violent felonies, violent or nonviolent felonies. That's the mandate. How does any reasonable person believe that this is a sensible approach to crime? Thank you for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, regulatory actions, and political maneuvers in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact your freedoms.
Please support the State of Freedom by becoming a monthly supporter or member of the Warrior Circle, or by advertising your business, your nonprofit, or your event with us. Go to freedomstate.us. We are bypassing the mainstream media cartel and the establishment political parties in Louisiana and coming directly to you, spreading the uncensored voice of freedom across Louisiana and beyond. Blanco Brothers has been in business in Louisiana for about 30 years now. I have personal experience with this company, and I know others who have as well. If you have a business or a home and you've got roofing, gutter, sheet metal issues at all, one number you need to know, and that's Blanco Brothers Construction. He will treat you right financially, and he will take very good care of you with regard to the quality of the service that he provides. I cannot recommend Blanco Brothers Construction more highly enough. Memorize the number 225-226-4222. Blanco Brothers Construction, the very best in the business.
They promised toughness, more laws, longer sentences, no more excuses. In February of 2024, Governor Landry called a special session on crime. Some good bills passed, but the centerpiece was very clear. Every 17-year-old charged with a crime, even nonviolent ones, would now be treated as an adult and sent into adult facilities. Parole was largely eliminated. Sentences got longer. What was missing? Parental accountability, root causes, and any real answer for already overcrowded jails. This is episode 2 in our series reviewing Governor Landry's track record, and we are taking a look at the fallout of Governor Landry's campaign promise to be tough on crime and sharing it with you so you can decide, are these new laws actually making Louisiana safer? This is the State of Freedom. I'm Danielle Walker, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, the watchdog-in-chief of Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, Chris Alexander. We're coming to y'all live on this Tuesday, August 11th at 10 a.m. Central on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network on Rumble, X, YouTube, Facebook. I think that's all. And take a minute, hit the thumbs up for us, give us a like, give us a share this with your friends. And you can also catch us later on our audio-only podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, and more. So, good morning, Chris. How are you?
Well, good morning, Danielle. It's good to see you as always.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Why don't we get into the scripture of the day? Today's topic is going to get both of us a little riled up, I'm afraid. Well, I'm not afraid, but it is just going to get us riled up. So, watchers, listeners, beware. Yeah. So the scripture of the day, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 12. Let me find it here. It says, we have boldness through him and free access through him, meaning through Jesus. We have boldness through Jesus and free access as kings before the Father because of our complete confidence in Christ's faithfulness. One of my favorite passages in Scripture is the end of Hebrews 10. And in verse 35, it says, so don't lose your bold, courageous faith, for you are destined for a great reward. And the passage I just read here in Ephesians tells us where that boldness comes from. We get it through Jesus and our complete confidence in Christ's faithfulness. And my sister was asking me recently how I get my expectations up. How do you get your expectations up? She asked, for what for what God is going to do in my life when it seems like everything is mundane and things aren't changing and the prayers I'm praying maybe have not manifested yet. The answers have not manifested. And my answer was this: I have to remember his faithfulness. I recount the miracles that he's already done in my life, the impossible things that suddenly became reality. Generic thankfulness is not going to strengthen your faith to bold expectations for God to come through, right? We have to think about these moments and these events in our lives where if God hadn't come through, everything would look totally different. And those are the footholds of faith and the reminders of Jesus' complete faithfulness that empower and embolden us and give us the right of access to approach the Father for whatever it is that's on our heart. And it's worth mentioning that we don't approach the Father as paupers, as stepchildren, as needy, as wretched and helpless. We approach God as kings. This passage says we approach God as kings because he has made us kings and priests through Christ. So be encouraged today. Get your hopes up. And I think it's an excellent practice. I mean, just really spend some time today focusing on being thankful for those miracles. You have to identify the miracles and remind yourself of the miracles so that you can get your hopes up for what he's going to do next.
It's worth going back, Danielle, and looking at where you were 6 months ago, a year ago, and what God has brought you through.
Yeah.
I love what you said about generic gratitude. You know, it's easy to mechanically say, thank you, Lord, but it's so helpful to go back and look at what specifically he has responded to, our
Yeah.
needs, our prayers in the past, because it's very easy not to give proper focus to the way that God has already responded to our needs and our
Yeah.
often desperate cries. So it's always important to take an inventory of where we were 6 months or a year ago or longer or whoever, and what specific issues in our lives God has already resolved or is
Yeah.
on the road to resolving, because we have a tendency to always look ahead. I have this need, this need, this need, and we tend to give short shrift, I think, to the areas of our lives that God has already responded in very significant ways to, and in very positive ways. So, and I think that does keep us hopeful. It renews our faith. I don't know why the tendency, Danielle, is always to sort of focus on the needs, and we tend to not emphasize enough those areas that God has already answered. So that's such a great prayer this morning, and such a great admonition that we need to always have, sort of be able to look back on times in our lives when we were extremely desperate, prayerful, and needy, and God responded. And all of us who were people of prayer have moments in our lives that we can point to like.
100%. And James said in his epistle that he encouraged us to start. I think it was James. I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me in the chat. Stir up your most holy faith. And that's how you stir up your most holy faith, right? You get your faith by reminding yourself of the testimonies of God's faithfulness in your life.
Exactly. And ultimately, the foundational principle to me in my own Christian walk is to try as best I can to live out of hope, to live out of the resurrection, to honor the crucifixion, to honor Christ's suffering, and to recognize that we will face those moments and those times, but to live out of the ultimate redemption of Christ through his resurrection, the ultimate victory of Christ through his resurrection. And I think that helps us to live out of a sense of hope. Because as you said last night, Danielle, when you were talking, God has already won. He's already won the victory. It doesn't always look the way we think it should look, and his ways are way above our ways. But if we are faithful and cling to his victory, we will achieve everything that he has in store for us individually and even as a society. And so I think we have that's such a great call on our hearts and on our lives to do exactly what you said today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And, as we shift into today's episode and the topic at hand, I think it bears mentioning that God's been so faithful to Louisiana. You mentioned my talk last night. Chris, you were with me, as was Christy Hike and Debbie Terrio and some other great patriots in Metairie at the LRA New Orleans meeting. And you have to just be struck by God's faithfulness when you think about where we were 6 years ago under Bell Edwards and under Obama, just in the midst of a totally different world than we're living in now. And look, we're not under any illusions that the world we're living in now is perfect or anywhere even close to perfect. But we can say people are waking up, people are fighting, people are standing up for what's right, and people are returning to the Lord, which is the source of their strength to be able to be in the fight in the first place. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely, Danielle. But I have to say this. I just want to say this. You know, Jesus said, the truth shall set you free. The
yeah.
truth shall set you free. And he is the way, the truth, and the life. And nothing comes from him that is not true. And he expects us to deal in the truth and in the reality, both eternally, spiritually, and temporally. We have to know the truth of what is occurring if we're going to change in a positive way going forward. And people are waking up and people are learning the truth. They're looking below the surface to find the real truth of what is occurring, because you can't change things if you don't really know what is going on. And I give you a great credit. I give the State of Freedom some credit for bringing the truth to the people, deeply analyzing the issues that most directly affect them, not giving it a superficial reading, and so that people really know what is occurring so they can take appropriate action. The truth shall set us free. And that's really what we're about here, Danielle, is shedding and spreading the truth in every area of political life and government life in Louisiana.
Yeah, and speaking of shedding and spreading, Chris, if COVID if COVID hadn't happened, I'm not sure that people would be open to this kind of unvarnished truth in the same way. You know, you think about the fact that we had to really face the reality that the CDC did not have our best interests at heart. All these government institutions that we had really been raised to believe, whether raised professionally or just, believing that they were the authorities that had our best interest, the American people's interest at heart, and they were going to do the right thing. When that started getting stripped away for people, I think it opened a willingness, and I guess it just opened a willingness to actually hear the ugly, ugly truth about government institutions and all kinds of entities, right? I mean, you think about the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation, all of these organizations that have been operating in the open for years without check, completely without check. And so that's where the truth tellers come in. As you said, the truth tellers were ushered in by a world filled with lies. And here we are as part of that puzzle trying to parse through what's happening in Louisiana.
And exactly, Danielle. And but for that very, very difficult and stressful time in our history, we would not ever have gotten to a point where people are more skeptical of the government, where people are less inclined to believe what government figures and what emanates from, government institutions. If COVID had not occurred, and I do believe that COVID was a failed exercise in tyranny. And every day that more and more people become aware of what really was going on there, people are starting to realize that that really was a failed exercise in tyranny. So although it was difficult and many of us suffered horrendously because of of really government tyranny and really a manufactured virus, we now are awake and alive and really able to view the government in a way really that our founding fathers advised us to view the government, which is always with robust, healthy skepticism. So I think that is a powerful, powerful change that people are realizing now. People are much less inclined now to trust the government at face value. We still have too many, unfortunately and sadly, who believe everything that emanates from a government institution that purports to have authority, but far fewer than existed before COVID, no question.
No question. And so maybe that brings us, Chris, to our topic at hand for today. We did our first, I guess, installment of this series where we're kind of unpacking what Governor Landry's campaign promises were, what his inaugural address promised and the vision he cast, and then what the lived reality is of the the laws and policies that are being instituted in follow on to that. And so where we left off, I think if you haven't seen the first episode we did on this, it was last Thursday, and we really just talked about the first special session, which was about redistricting, and it was and what is it? Chris, help me out here. Closed primaries.
Right. Redistricting, the closed primaries, the early appointments of
Yeah,
Governor Landry.
that's right.
Yes, which very, very important, because those were the early signs that perhaps Governor Landry's rhetoric was really not consistent, would not be consistent with the way he governed the state. And unfortunately, that has been largely borne out, but those were the early signs of it. And that's why we decided to cover those issues in the first installment.
Yeah, and the next thing that happened in the chronology was the special session on crime, and this was the fulfillment in a lot of ways of Landry's campaign promises to be tough on crime. And Chris, you and I had yesterday a little bit of a debate, like we usually do, about whether this constituted something that we should bring forward, because really it is a fulfillment of his promise. It's just no one really saw his promise as so off the mark of what Louisiana needs as it actually was, right? Because there's one thing we've unpacked as we've reviewed this stuff is that it's one thing to be tough on crime, and it is another thing entirely, absolutely entirely, to want Louisiana to be a safer state to live in.
Exactly. And you and I, Danielle, the State of Freedom, and many others who follow the State of Freedom, conservatives and constitutionalists, are very, very enthusiastic about reducing crime. And we want to be tough on crime. But you can't do it to the exclude. You can't do it in a way that completely forecloses the humanity of people who are charged with crimes. We approach, as we said earlier, Danielle, everything from a foundation of hope. And there is the hope and the possibility for redemption for everybody, even those, and often especially those who are accused and in fact have committed crime in our society. Those are the very ones that Christ came to redeem and to save. And yet everything that we see, the entire tenor of the criminal bills, both in the 2024 session and thereafter, have their foundation and their premise in two things. One, punishment for people accused of crimes, totally foreclose the right of redemption, the right of rehabilitation, and B, increased consolidation of power in the governor. Those are the two foundational principles of almost every, the vast majority of criminal legislation that was passed and signed by the governor. And so that is such a wrong-headed approach to addressing the problem of crime, as we will point out in some of these bills, along with, and what they did to change the law as it existed before this legislation passed.
Yeah, and you and I vigorously opposed pretty much every single bill I think that we're bringing forward today, except for one or two we were supportive of. Why don't we just kick it off, Chris, right here at the top with in the 2024 Senate Bill 8 by Senator Mike Reese. And this was, in my view, based on what you said, a very bizarre way to handle the state public defender's office. And it seems like it's just a further consolidation of power into the office of the governor.
Yes. And Danielle, the state indigent defender system, which provides criminal defense, criminal counsel for 88% of every criminal and everybody in the state of Louisiana who's charged with a crime. 88% of them are represented by the Indigent Public Defender Office. There were clearly inefficiencies in the law that this legislation was designed to address. But what this bill did, it would consolidated all power, operational control, budgetary authority, the hiring and firing of all indigent defenders, lawyers in the system, control the chief public defenders in every district in Louisiana, and put all of that under the direct control of this czar this state office of public defender directly appointed by and under the control of the governor. And that is so very dangerous in our constitutional system. The indigent defense system is constitutionally required under the Sixth Amendment to provide adequate, reasonable representation for everybody in the state who's accused by the government of a crime. On the other hand, you have the executive branch, i.e., the governor and the attorney general, who are responsible for prosecuting people who are accused of crimes. So there's a direct conflict of interest in what this bill did, which is put all the control over the indigent defense of criminal defendants under the control of the governor. There was major pushback in 2024 by indigent defense lawyers throughout the state, including my brother who does indigent defense in Shreveport, saying this is a gross conflict of interest. It grossly violates the separation of powers, and you can't put all this control under the very agencies that's responsible for prosecuting people accused of crimes. It was very, very wrong-headed. Because of all the pushback, there was a lot of pushback. The bill was amended to create this indigent defendant board, 9 or 11 members, some of whom would be appointed by the Supreme Court, some of whom would be chosen by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, a couple of whom would be chosen by the state legislature, one or two that we appointed by the governor. But it would have been a balance of balanced appointees on this board that would have had the authority to approve the appointment, of this czar who would be essentially controlling the indigent defense system. It would have required their approval for his appointment and reappointment, and it would have required this board to have some control over the budget, over the contracts, and have some operation and control over that system in Louisiana. And that's ultimately the form in which the bill was passed. I still don't think it's a good bill because I don't believe the executive agency, the governor, has any power or should have any constitutional leverage when it comes to indigent criminal defense in Louisiana because they're supposed to be prosecuting it. Nonetheless, the bill survived and passed in better form than it originally started. So as the bill ended and was signed by the governor, this board still did maintain certain control and neutralized to some degree the power of this czar and the power of this governor over the indigent defense system in Louisiana. That was SB 8 in 2024. But it was still an effort by the governor to assume more and more political control in Louisiana.
Yeah, and Chris, for people who are listening or watching and they're saying, well, this is the legislature that passed this bill, not the governor, what would you say to them?
I would say that Governor Landry wanted this bill. There's no question Mike Reese brought this bill because Governor Landry wanted it. Absolutely no question about it. Mike Reese did not come up with this idea to bring SB 8, which consolidates really plenary power, or would have an original form in the governor, basically having the person who controls the mechanism of criminal defense representation for people who can't afford lawyers totally under the control of the governor. That was not Mike Reese's idea. That was Governor Landry's initiative.
Even if it was Mike Reese's idea, Governor Landry knows where his veto pin is.
Well, exactly. This really poses a grave constitutional crisis, really, in Louisiana, as far as the separation of powers and the great conflict of interest that this bill created. In fact, we can talk about HB 1005 in connection with this, and I'll bring up my next point in connection with that, Danielle.
Yeah, just if you would just continue, Chris, there was some more chipping away at the independence of this board, and the original intent of Mike Reese's bill ultimately seems like was won out this year.
Yes, so SB 8 it significantly eroded the independent authority of the Indigent Defense Board in Louisiana. HB 1005 through Muscarella this year in 2026 basically finished it off, which basically says now that there is no approval oversight that's required by the Indigent Defense Board either for appointment or reappointment. They no longer have any operational control. They no longer have any influence over the hiring and the firing of individual public defenders or district defenders throughout the state. That has all now been collapsed, and even that now is in the hands of this czar appointed by the governor and under his control. So indigent defense now in Louisiana, which our founding fathers said that everybody accused of a crime has a fundamental constitutional right to independent, adequate representation to hold the government to its burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt if the government is going to accuse a Louisiana citizen or American citizen of a crime. It is a hugely important part of our system. And now that system is entirely under the control of the very agency in Louisiana that is responsible for prosecuting and jailing them. How does that make sense? And that's under HB 1005.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, I'm just going to make a small announcement here. It looks like the stream to Facebook on the State of Freedom failed. It's working on LeCag. So if someone would mind going over to the State of Freedom and posting a note that just says, hey, if you need to watch on Facebook, go over to the LeCag page. It's apparently working over there.
LeCag in the house, baby. LeCag in the house, Danielle.
Going strong. Well, Chris, let's take the next one that we had on our list, House Bill 9 by Representative Debbie Villio. This, to me, I just was very shocked. You and I spent the entire criminal session very shocked by the way that Republicans in this conservative supermajority, right? This is when we were still talking about having a conservative supermajority. We're talking about handling parole, talking about handling or dealing with rehabilitation. I mean, one of the big takeaways I had from the entire criminal session was that there was not one single bill proposed that was going to deal with rehabilitation. There was not one single bill that was going to deal with, okay, if we're going to be this tough on crime, what are we doing for overcrowded jails? Because, and maybe we'll get to this a little bit later, but I just wanted to be sure and make the point. The streets are not safer. People can see that there's maybe been a surge in police force in New Orleans. Maybe the streets have been cleaned up a little bit, but there are DAs who are not prosecuting violent, repeat criminal offenders, not because they don't have the will to prosecute them, but there's no place for them to go. They know they're going to end up back on the streets. So the jail crowding is a really big issue. Private prison systems and the really disgusting incentives to keep people locked up, as many people for as long as possible. That's not in the best interest of Louisiana families. That's not in the best interest of Louisiana taxpayers, and that's not in the best interest of just us as a people, right? What you and I were talking about before the show, Chris. How you treat one person is how you treat everybody, right? How you do one thing is how you do everything. So if that's the case, being so tough on crime as HB 9 put forward in 2024, they wanted to take away the power of the Department of Corrections and Parole Board to recommend parole. So you've done everything. Okay, so you committed a crime. You did something wrong. As Tina Peters reminded us, your sentence is your punishment, right? There's the government doesn't have any further constitutional ability to punish you further. And one of the ways that we've set out to powerfully and positively incentivize people who have committed crimes is to say, hey, if you start showing us that you know that what you did was wrong and that you're going to behave differently, you can get out a little bit earlier. And maybe, the circumstances of your time in prison might lighten up, right? You might have more freedoms even while you're there.
Exactly. And what you just described, Danielle, had been passed in 2017 under John Bel Edwards, bipartisan support by Republicans and Democrats. Believe me, I've got a lot of criticism of John Bel Edwards. I was not a fan of John Bel Edwards for many, many reasons. However, the criminal reforms that he instituted through legislation in 2017 had produced and were producing measurable results, specifically when it comes to parole. There was a 40% recidivism rate prior to the 2017 reforms that were instituted. Within 2 years of those reforms, that had been reduced to 30%. And guess what, Danielle? For everyone that took advantage of the rehabilitation scheme, the programs, the certificates, the genuine effort to reform the administrative programs that were in place, the recidivism rate for felony offenders reduced to 18%.
Wow.
18% because of those reforms. And the state saved well over $150 million in that process, 70% of which, by law, under the reforms, had to go directly back into the communities to fund victim programs and to further educate offenders in order to prevent them from reoffending, to provide programs for them. And so it was working. There was measurable results being achieved because of those reforms. 2024 comes along, and HB 9, Debbie Villio, completely eviscerates parole eligibility for anyone convicted of a crime in Louisiana after the effective date of this bill, HB 9, August 1, 2024, I believe, with very, very narrow exceptions. It even wiped out parole eligibility, Danielle, for people who were severely ill, medical furloughs, people who were dying, people who were incapacitated. No chance whatsoever. And you know what this does, Danielle, this mercenary approach to criminal justice? It completely has diminished the hope of people who have made mistakes, even serious mistakes, because it has totally removed their incentive to improve themselves, to get better in order to get good time credits and to have an early release. So that's basically what it's done. That's what HB 9 did. I was very, very disappointed in this legislation in 2024, not only because on its face it's just so utterly mercenary, but also because it completely ignored, frankly, the reforms and the measurable progress that had been made based upon the law that was in place before that. So I'm very disappointed in that. And I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I can tell you also about HB 10, which basically said for every offense, even though, and so that bill was going forward, anybody accused of a crime from the effective date bill going forward, but then HB 10 comes along and says 10 did. Prior to that, people who had demonstrated rehabilitation, people who had worked very, very hard to improve themselves, to demonstrate their remorse and to show measurable evidence of progress, they could reduce their sentences significantly and be released. And they were, with a very low recidivist rate. So it was working. It was saving our state a significant amount of money. And all of that was eviscerated in 2024 so that our legislators could beat their chest and say, we're tough on crime.
Yeah, and what is that doing for the state, Chris? It's so disappointing, and I find it extremely inhumane. You know, I would think there's a couple thoughts I have on this. One is, you know, we've talked recently that legislators, there's a lot of groupthink when it comes to votes in the legislature and the way that you and I have kind of resolved to approach this going forward in terms of recommendations is, if this is taking away a freedom, if this is removing a right unjustly or just a government overreach, you have to vote no. You have to vote no. And if it is restoring some kind of autonomy, then you have to vote yes. And I don't think that's any different for this criminal session, because look what it's doing. So now the money saved is no longer there. The prisons are still overcrowded and people have no hope. And so the recidivism rate is going through the roof.
Exactly. And it's doing nothing. It's doing nothing to reduce violent crime overall in Louisiana, nothing, no effect. Yet we're spending more money to incarcerate people for longer and longer periods of time with very few opportunities for them to be rehabilitated or to improve themselves so that they don't reoffend. Sooner or later, Danielle, we have to remember their sentences are going to end at some point. And long-term institutionalization does not do anything to reduce repeat offenses, whether they're in jail for 10, 15, or 20 years, if you don't address the organic core reasons why they're there to begin with. And that's what some of those 2017 reforms were doing, and that's what has been eviscerated and almost totally removed because of the legislation passed in 2024.
Yeah, and in 2024, I think the bill that shocked me personally the most, Chris, is the next one on our list, Senate Bill 3 by Senator Heather Cloud, and I know Stuart Cathy had a bill that was pretty much identical to it, so I want to make sure his name's attached to this as well, because what it did was it changed the definition of a child so that offenders as young as 17 could be prosecuted as adults. Now, come on, I'm sorry, but that is not okay, right? I mean, how many stories have you heard of, a young man being at a party and things just went wrong and he's in the wrong place at the wrong time? I can't even imagine. So this, for first-time offenders at 17, no priors, you're going to be tried as an adult and be put in an adult prison?
Exactly.
How is that helping society?
It's truly extraordinary because that's exactly what the bill does, Danielle. It mandates that every 17-year-old charged with a felony has to be tried as an adult and prosecuted as an adult and housed in adult facilities and rub shoulders in the court system with hardened adult criminal offenders. It's just unbelievable that this would be the case, especially when prosecutors already had the discretion to try 17-year-olds as adults in certain cases in their discretion, and most prosecutors exercised that right routinely when it was appropriate to do so. But to say, as a matter of legislative fiat, that every 17-year-old in Louisiana who's charged with a felony has to be prosecuted and tried as an adult is just unbelievably bizarre to me. And by the way, how does the legislature have the knowledge that's necessary of individual cases to determine what is appropriate under an individual case? These are fact-intensive determinations that have to be made on a case-by-case basis. But the legislature wanted to be able to come and tell the public that we're tough on crime in Louisiana now. So every 17-year-old who's ever charged with a felony, they get to be tried as an adult. We're tough on crime. Beat our chest. It's truly extraordinary. And again, it's not going to do anything and has not done anything to reduce violent crime. You know what it's going to do, Danielle? It's going to teach these juvenile offenders who do have a chance of rehabilitation and hope, if they had the services that they needed and the programs that they needed and the attention that they needed, it's going to teach them, instead of becoming productive members of society, it's going to teach them how to be better criminals. That's what's going to happen. That's going to be the result. And I just think it's unbelievable in a humane society that this type of sweeping mandate would be imposed upon prosecutors in criminal cases in Louisiana. And that's exactly what this bill does. And it does it, Danielle, for any felony, not just violent felonies, violent or nonviolent felonies. That's the mandate. How does any reasonable person believe that this is a sensible approach to crime?
Well, I just want to remind folks that in the state of Louisiana, you have to be 18 to purchase cigarettes. You have to be 21 to purchase alcohol. I think you have to be 18 to sign up for military service. But you can be tried as an adult at 17. So part of my beef with this is the complete incoherence and inconsistency of the treatment of kids in this, of people, young adults in this age between 17 and 21. You know, if the state wants to define an adult, why don't we figure out how to define an adult before we go down this road? This is insane.
That's a great point, Danielle. Great point.
The other thing I want to raise is and I didn't even really think about this, but in the recent years, especially when President Trump was taking office in his first few months of trying to clean up the crime in DC, there was a lot of talk about how 17-year-olds are basically manipulated, used by gangs to commit some of these violent crimes, specifically because they can just go to juvie and it's not a big deal. And I understand that that was part of the driving force behind this legislation in the first place. But as you said, there is still discretion. So a judge could rule or treat the crime however the judge deemed appropriate, which I think is the fair way to do it. But one thing that Louisiana never considered is something that Judge Jeanine Shapiro, or I guess she's a USA now, was doing, which is go after the parents and hold them responsible. You want to get tough on crime? Tell the parents, guess what? You're going to be serving some time. You're going to be having big fines. Maybe that'll be just the ticket to getting this shut down. But I just think, I'm not saying, anyway, all I'm saying is Louisiana just has taken this stance of let's put more and more people behind bars with less and less opportunity to change course and with no meaningful way for relief or turnaround whatsoever, and redemption is not even a thought.
That's the whole thrust and the whole tenor of it, Danielle. Basically, we're going to punish people because it gets us political points. We can say that we're tough on crime, and we're going to completely neglect what I believe is the reality of human experience, that many people, if not most people, have the capacity to be redeemed, have the capacity for rehabilitation, especially minors, especially 17-year-olds. There should be a presumption in favor of reform. Can you imagine a society in which what this basically is telling every 17-year-old that makes a mistake or commits a felony, there's really no hope for you anymore. There's no hope. We're not going to give you any incentive to improve. You're going to serve your entire sentence. You're going to be tried with a bunch of adults. Your life is basically over. That's basically the message that is being sent. But with SB 3 and SB 4, because SB 4 applied all of the draconian parole provisions that basically eliminated also to juveniles who are prosecuted for crimes. So basically, they also are treated basically the same as adults under our criminal system now in Louisiana. How skeptical, how jaded, how cynical is this? Not to mention the fact that, as we said earlier, Danielle, there is no way that this will have an effect, nor has it had an appreciable effect on the reduction of crime in Louisiana.
And Chris, so we have a crime problem. We have these bills that are putting more and more pressure on the criminal justice system. What has been done in terms of increasing the budgets for the DA's office if we've got to prosecute crimes in a different or more specific way? Has there been anything done for that? I mean, how are we supposed to deal with this? Because at this rate, there's not going to be a reduction in crime because there's no real program, or there's no deliberate attempt to try and rehabilitate the people who have committed crimes.
Exactly. You're exactly right, Danielle. So they're already overstretched. They're already struggling to keep up with the caseload that they have. And yet they continue to impose more and more requirements on these DAs, and nothing on the front end, nothing to try to prevent these people who have made mistakes from repeating these mistakes in the future. It's amazing how starved we are with respect to that budget, but we can continue to impose all of these requirements on these DAs to prosecute, specifically to prosecute minors as adults, and to totally foreclose the right of people who have convicted of felonies from ever getting any kind of good time credit, ever getting early release, even in cases where they've demonstrated that they've earned it and they deserve it. And so I just believe that this is going to cost our state hundreds of millions of dollars more in money. We're going to be housing more and more. You know who this benefits, Danielle? This benefits nobody except the prison industrial complex in
right.
Louisiana right now, whereby these private for-profit prison facilities are making millions and millions of dollars by incarcerating all of these people. They are going to become multi-millionaires and billionaires precisely because of these draconian parole laws that have been passed, the fact that these minors have to be tried as adults, the fact that nobody can get out on good time, early release, nothing. Those are going to be the people who are benefiting from this financially, and the rest of the citizens of Louisiana are going to be paying the price, both in terms of our tax dollars and the fact that this is not going to have a measurable impact on crime in Louisiana. If anything, it's going to make it worse. What happens when people, Danielle, have no hope? What do people do when they feel like they have absolutely no hope, when they feel like they've been totally thrown away by society? What do? They become
I'll tell you. The Bible says it very clearly. When people have no vision, they cast off restraint, meaning they will do whatever they want to do, whatever's set in front of them.
Absolutely brilliant, because they feel like they have no hope. And that's what's going on here. This is just a colossal diminution of hope that is being caused among our inmates in Louisiana and those who are accused of crime. That's what's going on here. I don't remember, Danielle, in the 2024 session, I don't remember having one conversation, and I certainly don't remember one piece of legislation in 2024 that sought to address the issues that you and I are talking about here, right here, or even talked about,
even acknowledge them.
Or even acknowledged them, and totally ignored the statistically provable progress that had been made under the reforms, criminal reforms under John Bel Edwards. Just totally thrown out so that Governor Landry could come in again and say, I'm tough on crime, and the legislature could say, I'm tough on crime. Well, sorry, but the casualty of your political talking point are the taxpayers of Louisiana and people who are accused and convicted of crimes who otherwise would have some hope to become contributing members of society once again. They are the casualties of your political talking point and your political bravado.
Yeah, 100%. So we're trading people's lives for press conferences.
Well said. Well said.
Let's talk about some good ideas, Chris. These came in 2025. We started seeing, well, first, let me see here. I think we covered that well, so I'm just going to move forward. But Senator Duplessis, who is someone, as you pointed out, Chris, we don't often even get into the same ballpark of agreeing with, but on this issue in particular, we did. And he brought Senate Bill 218 in 2025, and it was a bill to address the non-unanimous jury verdicts. People who have been watching us for this past session, there were also some non-unanimous jury bills that would address the problems related to people convicted by non-unanimous juries prior to 2019?
Yes.
Prior to 2019. So Senator Royce Duplessis's bill would have addressed that in a meaningful way. Do you want to talk about that bill, Chris?
Absolutely. And as you said, Danielle, we rarely agree with Royce Duplessis on anything. But on this issue, Royce Duplessis was 100% right. There are close to 1,500 Louisiana citizens sitting in jail right now in Louisiana under an unconstitutional conviction and sentencing scheme. The Louisiana Supreme Court ruled in 2019, I believe, that people accused of felonies in Louisiana must be convicted by a unanimous jury, and anything short of that is unconstitutional and it's illegal. So what do you do with the 1,500 or so that were convicted of felonies and are being in jail right now and were convicted by less than unanimous jury verdicts? You have to address those issues. You have to address those people who are sitting in jail. So what do? The constitutional solution to that is to give them, to start from ground zero and to start the criminal process over and give the district attorney an opportunity to work out a resolution with these inmates or possibly try these cases again. because their sentences are constitutionally invalid. Royce Duplessis' bill would have essentially done that. It would have required the cases to start over and have required the DAs to go forward and prove their cases once again. And that is the proper solution in a situation like this. The bill got out of Senate committee. I think it was Jude A, and then it was voted down on the Senate floor, apparently because our governor and our legislature does not believe that people who have been convicted unconstitutionally by less than unanimous jury verdicts and are sitting in jail, some of whom may be innocent of the crime for which they were convicted, that they deserve constitutionally appropriate relief for that. And so the bill was defeated, but it was a good bill that Royce Duplessis had. It's unfortunate that that bill was defeated. So once again, it's consistent with the theme that whatever we have to do to punish, we're going to do it. And anything that would give even constitutionally appropriate relief to people who were not convicted by unanimous jury verdicts or who may be in jail unjustly, we're going to kill. We're going to kill it.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting. And there were some bills that talked a little bit about relief or problems with relief. And one of them is Jay Morris's SB 39, Chris. And this was his bill in 2025 that basically said, look, if you are in prison and you served your time and we didn't really do the paperwork we didn't notice that you were still stuck in there and you should have been out. Tough stuff. There's no liability for the state if we just kept you locked up indefinitely for months and months after your sentence was served.
Right. So not only in the state of Louisiana are we not going to give any credence to the idea that someone could possibly earn early release, that's eviscerated, that's done. We're not going to hold the state responsible in any way if we hold people past their sentence. Weeks and months past their sentence, they're supposed to be released. The state made a mistake. The state's negligent. The state didn't release them. They've paid their dues. They've done their time. His bill in original form would have basically said, so what? The state has no liability in a situation where someone who has served their time and should be released is not released timely and serves months and months potentially after their out date. No relief, no civil remuneration whatsoever. That was the original version of Senator Morris's bill. Terribly, terribly unjust. And we fought that very, very hard from the beginning. Fortunately, there were amendments put on it that made the bill much, much more palatable. So there is a real mechanism of relief now when someone is held past their, an inmate is held past their out date. And there have also been instituted in the state real reforms in the Department of Corrections to make sure that this does not happen, because I can tell you it was happening routinely, Danielle, beforehand. So one good thing that came out of this, because of a lot of pushback and a lot of amendments on the bill, is that the Department of Public Safety and Corrections now has instituted genuine reforms to make sure that people are released timely after they have served their sentence. To us, it's a matter of fundamental liberty. It was great to be a part of that legislation and making sure that that reform was instituted.
Do you want to hear something, Chris? So perverse, so outrageous, so absolutely stunning. You're talking about the state not being willing to take on liability for keeping inmates in prison past their sentence date. Yet here we are, it's August 11th, 2026, and the state continues to just go out of its way to assume liability for projects like SpaceX, for the Hyundai plant, for carbon capture and sequestration, for the water with respect to data centers. So this, can you imagine the small amount of money this would represent for compensation to prisoners who were left hanging out in prison longer than they needed to be, versus the billions and billions potentially of liability that they have put on the taxpayers of Louisiana without our consent?
Absolutely. And the as you alluded to, Danielle, the multi-billion-dollar tax credits and tax subsidies being granted to these corporations that are concealed behind these non-disclosure agreements, money that would be going into local communities for schools and local infrastructure. We can sacrifice that so that we can say, oh, we have economic development in Louisiana, but we're not going to provide even minimal compensation for people whose core liberty interests are being deprived because the state is holding them beyond their release dates. And we're not going to also give any credence at all to the possibility that people who are accused and convicted of even serious crimes in Louisiana have any chance at all of being released early or rehabilitating their lives. And it's costing us hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that are going directly into the pockets of these for-profit prisons. Don't think for one second, Danielle, that there is not a connection, and probably a sinister connection, between these draconian criminal bills that were passed that will result in people being jailed for much, much longer, and the money that's going to be going into these private prisons. There is a direct connection there, I promise you.
When we could be rehabilitating these felons, rehabilitating these people who've been convicted of crimes, getting them out of prison in much better shape, possibly even earlier, and actually have room for the criminals that we can't fit into the jails now.
Exactly. And 82, Danielle, 82 under the prior law, under the reforms from 2017, 82 of the people who were incarcerated and who took advantage of the programs, the rehabilitation efforts, the reentry programs that were available, 82 of them became productive members of society and did not repeat any criminal offense whatsoever. 82. All of that has been eviscerated now, and it's truly, truly sad. This is just I really believe that this is blindness. It's utter and complete blindness when it comes to, and many of these people, Danielle, and I'm not going to name any names here, but many of these legislators, they actively promote and publicize the fact that they're Christian. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, this is not Christian. It is not Christian to preemptively foreclose the possibility of hope, redemption, and rehabilitation for people who have made serious mistakes in our society. That is not Christian. To me, that is antithetical to the heart of Christ. And from a practical point of view, again, it's not going to do anything to improve our society or make it any safer. All it's going to do is collapse the hope of people who otherwise could become productive members of society and actually make a positive difference in our world.
Yeah, and we don't have 18-story prisons in Louisiana, Chris. So there's not an unlimited number of places to put criminals who are actively committing crimes now. So I just don't think we can underscore this enough. Any people that are sitting in prison right now, rightfully because they committed a crime, that are not being rehabilitated, that are not being moved out, they are stopping the system from putting someone else in there who deserves to be in there. So what we have is probably more criminals on the streets than we would have before because the system has mandated that these people stay stuck.
Exactly. And what need, Danielle, is the problem that you just described going to create? It's going to create the need for new prisons. And who is going to be owning and running those prisons? For-profit entities, for-profit corporations that are going to be making money off of the backs of Louisiana taxpayers, more and more money, because they're going to be building more and more of these for-profit prisons. The cycle is I think really, really vicious when you really, really think about what's occurring here in Louisiana, Danielle. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure that we land on this one last bill, Chris, which is, it was this past sessions. We supported this bill. It was by Senator Gerald Boudreaux, SB 125, and it was his compensation for wrongful convictions bill. It was raising the cap, I believe, and you'll recall the figures involved in it. But it was vetoed by the governor over a matter of $9 million. So the governor and his crime package have wiped out that $150 million saved by the rehabilitation program. I think we can probably safely assume. So those savings are gone. The work in the community is gone because those funds are not being redirected. But we're going to sit here and say that people who were wrongfully convicted by the state of Louisiana, who have sat in prison because of the negligence or ineptitude
or otherwise,
or
negligence
ineptitude,
or otherwise.
yes, or otherwise, because it could be also targeting
Right.
by state prosecutors, we're going to quabble over $9 million. What the state has an insane problem with the concept of big numbers and small numbers. You learned that in school, big numbers and small numbers. Well, I'll tell you, billions and billions of dollars of liability is a lot more than a couple million for whenever the state does something wrong to hold over prisoners that should have gotten out. And I'll tell you that $150 million is a bigger number, Governor Landry, than $9 million.
Absolutely, Danielle. And this bill you're talking about, SB 125 by Boudreaux, this was a bill that basically said it would have increased the amount of money that a person could receive from the state who had been in prison for years and years and years, 20, 30, 40 years, and was later declared factually innocent. In other words, exonerated from the crime of which they were convicted. And it happens. People are falsely convicted. And sometimes DNA evidence comes along or other evidence comes along that says this person was innocent. So they've gone into court and proven through competent evidence that I've been sitting in jail for 15, 20, 30, 40 years for a crime that I did not commit. And SB 125 would have simply increased by 1/3 the amount of money that that they could petition the state to recover for being stripped of their liberty for that long, and increased the number of years from 10 to 15 years for which they could recover that money. This was not a radical bill. This was not a bill that created any kind of a windfall for anybody. It simply would have provided a slightly, marginally increased compensation for people who were wrongfully convicted by the state and were deprived of 20 and 30, 40 years of their liberty in prison. The bill passed overwhelmingly in the House, overwhelmingly in the Senate, and then was vetoed by the governor. Vetoed by the governor, Danielle, because of it might be abused and it's going to cost too much money, whatever BS excuses he gave, because he doesn't care, apparently, about liberty. He doesn't care about people who were spent many years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. Meanwhile, because he's a steward of our tax dollars, right, but he can give multi-billion-dollar corporations these massive tax subsidies to bribe them to come to Louisiana and conceal these subsidies behind NDAs so they can bring these data centers and bring CCS pipelines to our state. He can give them billions of dollars of tax relief that would otherwise be going to local communities. Doesn't care about that. Not a steward of anything there. But then again, when it comes to giving marginal increased relief to people who the state, the executive agency, has put in prison for 20 or 30 or 40 years unlawfully, we can't give them any relief because it's cost too much and I'm a good steward of taxpayer dollars. What a crock of BS. That's exactly what that is.
And don't forget, Chris, not only are they getting these billions of dollars of tax relief, they're also shifting all of the liability of any potential malfeasance, environmental disasters onto the taxpayers.
Yes, and it was originally, Danielle, 10 years, but more recently, it's now 50 years. So the carbon capture and sequestration company can come in, bury these pipelines, bury this compressed CO2 under your property right here in Louisiana, and 50 years, which is not a real long time when you really think about it. So your grandkids are out playing in the yard or somewhere. There's a major pipeline rupture. And if 50 years have passed, no matter what injuries have occurred, no matter what injuries resulted from that rupture or from that accident, The corporations who are responsible are not held liable at all. They're off the hook. They're gone. It reverts to the state. The only person you can hold responsible is the state, which is essentially the taxpayers. So they get all kinds of relief on the corporate end. It's just amazing, Danielle, that our governor bends over backwards to bow in homage to these corporations that want to come to Louisiana, imposes no responsibilities on them, tax responsibilities, requirements to hire a certain number of locals. We have no ideas what the details are of these agreements, whether they're data centers or CCS. Give them massive tax relief. They pay no inventory tax. They pay no sales tax for 20 and 30 years. Who wouldn't want to come here? So they come here. They hide it all behind NDAs. And yet you look over here to a Louisiana citizen who's in jail for 30 years for a crime he didn't commit, and zero additional relief can be offered by our governor, who campaigned on a platform of honoring the Constitution of the United States. I think it's extraordinarily sad, extraordinarily sad. We cannot be cafeteria constitutionalists in this state anymore, Danielle. And I think there are Republicans who understand that. We don't go through a line and say, oh, I like this provision of the Constitution, a buffet-style constitutionalist. I like this, I don't like this, we'll put this back. Either we believe in the Constitution or we do not. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful, the discrepancy we see when it comes to when our governor suddenly becomes a good steward of our fiscal resources and taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, I think you may have coined the phrase having spasms of fiscal responsibility.
Absolutely. And that applies to the governor and to the legislature. There's no question. So I think on the whole, Danielle, the criminal laws that have been passed in Louisiana, with very few exceptions, all of them have been predicated on a very, very, really dark sort of and sinister foundation that people who are accused or convicted of crimes, your life is basically over. You can plan to spend many, many, many years of your life in prison with zero hope of reform, zero hope of rehabilitation, no matter what you do to prove that you are a different person, that you've become a better person. It does not matter. And we're gonna reach down even into the population of 17-year-olds, where at least with them there should be a presumption of reform, presumption of rehabilitation, and we're basically gonna we're gonna put that dark cloak over them as well.
And Chris, as you have reminded us time and time again, these judges have the agency to handle these cases, truly heinous cases. Let's say it's a truly heinous case. The judge, they call it throwing the book at someone for a reason, right? I mean, the judge has the ability to pose stiff penalty whenever he or she believes that it is due. Juries have that ability as well when the judge instructs them. So we don't need the legislature, who is blind to the details of every single case, to dictate what the outcomes must be in advance.
Exactly. The DAs and prosecutors have always had the authority to handle cases in a way that is commensurate with the circumstances and the facts of each case. If they're not doing their job, that's a different issue. If a judge is not doing his job, that's a different issue. But the solution is not to impose by legislative fiat all of these requirements and mandates on prosecutors and on judges. That's just not their responsibility. The legislature is in no position to know what is appropriate in a given set of circumstances. They're not sitting in a courtroom. They're not sitting on a jury. I certainly understand that the legislature has the power to make broad policy initiatives and broad policy directives when it comes to sentencing and guidelines and that sort of thing. I understand that. But you can't mandate that nobody who's convicted of a felony in Louisiana ever has a chance for parole until they serve, 85% of a sentence. And the same applies to juveniles. You just are not in a position to be able to make these determinations, and it's going to work a colossal injustice on our society, on many individual defendants. No question about that. And Danielle, I can tell you that a year, 2 years, 3 years, we're going to look back on this, and we're going to realize that not only have these initiatives and these laws had zero measurable effect on the reduction of crime in Louisiana, violent or otherwise, but actually has had the adverse effect, because you said a little while ago, when people have no hope, they're going to do things that they otherwise would not do.
Yeah, that's it. So I think that rounds us out for today. And we get no joy out of saying that this is the state of our criminal justice laws, right? We take no joy in saying that there was something that was working that has been completely destroyed or reworked so that it doesn't work well. I would just remind people that Governor Landry was a law enforcement officer. He wasn't, Chris, what kind of, was he police?
I'm not sure. Maybe state police, maybe sheriff's deputy. I'm not sure, but he was.
And he also was the top prosecutor in the state as attorney general. Is that correct?
Absolutely. He absolutely was. No question about it. No question.
So this isn't like someone who doesn't understand the law or the implications of the force and enforcement of law, trying to rework a set of bills, trying to rework a system that's not working. This is something very different than that.
Absolutely. And Danielle, I'm very satisfied and very happy that we are able to come here and talk about, this from a constitutional perspective, from the perspective of equity, real justice, and with a view to whether or not these bills are going to do anything really to make Louisiana any safer. And they're not going to. Unfortunately, most people just look at this legislation superficially and say, oh, we're locking up more people, we're going to reduce crime, we're going to beat them down more, we're going to be more punitive. And many people, that's all they look at. And they don't look at things any more deeply or any more analytically to see, well, what kind of effect really will this have on our state and ultimately on the health and safety of our communities? And I just am very, very concerned that the net effect of this, both in terms of the expenditure of our tax resources, the health of juveniles who are being prosecuted as adults, and ultimately the reduction, the effect on our crime, all is going to be negative, all is going to be bad. And we have a responsibility to point that out.
Yeah, we do. And we would love for you to chime in on what you think. So if you are catching this later, drop us a line in the chat. And tomorrow is Warrior Wednesday. If you are a member of the Warrior Circle, we'd love for you to call in and give us your perspective on what you've heard so far in part 1 and part 2 of what we're bringing forward about Governor Landry's record. And we will also potentially, I think we probably will talk about quote-unquote tax reform tomorrow morning as well. So what I like
is
to
that
call,
the next installment?
I think, well, what I'd like to call is the 3-card Monty of tax reform.
The 3-card Monty, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. I can see the headline now, Danielle. I can see the headline now. But I like the fact that we have a series we're going through issue by issue, and that it's really good. I think that we're doing this, and I would suspect, Danielle, that there probably are conservatives who may disagree with our perspective on this and on our interpretation of the criminal laws that were recently passed. But you know what? And we absolutely respect it. We want to hear your feedback on this. This is our perspective, and we at least know that it's thoughtful and well reasoned. And I guarantee you're probably not going to hear this perspective on other platforms. There's no question. And no one is more conservative, Danielle. No one is more loyal to the Constitution than you and I. And in fact, that's precisely why our perspective on this is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I owe a lot of this perspective to you, Chris, because you have been in the trenches as an attorney doing this very work. You see what transpires. You see how these laws actually impact people's lives, and you've seen people come out of it better people than they were going into the system, and that is the ultimate goal, right? If people have to be punished for their crime, wouldn't you want, just like your children, wouldn't you want them to come out better, having learned something, rather than completely beat down, demoralized, and now a greater drain on society?
Absolutely, Danielle. No question about it. We have to remember that we are a society of justice, no question. But the concept of justice is not simply prosecuting people and locking people up for long periods of time. Justice is much more comprehensive than that. And we have to remember that in our approach and our policy decisions when it comes to criminal justice in Louisiana have to reflect that. And unfortunately, these bills simply do not reflect that. They reflect just the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, the presumption is in favor of darkness instead of light. And I want to stay as a child of the light. And I hope and I believe that our laws should reflect that always.
Yeah, just as the Lord admonished in Isaiah 55, my views of mercy are not the same as your views on mercy, and my ways are not the same as your ways. I think that's what we're looking at today, Chris, in black and white right here. Also, just to mention, if you are not yet a member of the Warrior Circle and you would like to be, you can do that today at join.freedomstate.us. You'll get the number to the Freedom Phone and you'll be able to dial in tomorrow. So do that for us. And if you are a business or you know someone who has a business that would benefit from advertising with us, reach out. You can reach out to Chris or to me, Chris@lacag.org, Danielle at freedomstate.us. We'd love to have a conversation and consider your business to promote if your values align with ours and you think that you would get some benefit out of our very rapidly growing platform. And Thursday, we will be having Drew Hawkins from Gulf State Newsroom on to talk about his investigative reporting on the non-disclosure agreements, what he found. I think that'll be very revealing, Chris. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. I know he interviewed some friends of ours, and we'll look forward to hearing what he has to say.
I'm excited.
Yeah, a couple other announcements. One, let me just put it up here. Sorry. We the People Bayou is having a meeting, and our guest speaker is going to be Dr. Randy Russ. This is August 20th. That's a Thursday evening in Houma. So if you are in the area or can get to the area, we would welcome you to do that. Just visit WTPBayou.org and put in your RSVP just so we make sure we got enough seats for everybody. And then last but not least, Chris and I will be attending and covering the Storm Summit by Unauthorized. This is going to be in Las Vegas, September 10th through the 13th. And I think I've mentioned a number of times the great lineup of guests, but some of our favorites will be there. Joe Hoft, Professor Clements, Tina Peters, Mark Cook, and many others. So if you are able to get out to Las Vegas, we'd love to see you there. And this whole summit is going to be about election integrity and accountability. So if you can get there, let us know if you're planning to go. We'd love to see you there. And I think that's it for me, Chris. Anything else?
I think that takes care of it, Danielle. It's always a pleasure being with you. The time just flies by when you're having fun, and I always have fun with you. So I look forward to tomorrow, and I very much am looking forward to talking about the taxes in Louisiana, the 3-card Monty. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it'll be good. Well, thank you all for joining. We love you, and we will see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Central.
Fuego, it's just unbelievable. Whether it's the flame-grilled carne asada or a signature mango margarita, I had one of those too. They're serving up a literal feast of freedom at Calle Fuego. It's just extraordinary. I love the owners, Andres and Jose. They run such a great restaurant. The service is extraordinary. The atmosphere is great. So if you're in Pineville in the Alexandria area or passing through, or if you live there, go to Calle Fuego and tell them the State of Freedom sent you. I went to Red Zeppelin yesterday with my second oldest son, Eli, and I got this large veggie pizza, which is the best in Baton Rouge. Red Zeppelin is the best kept secret, but because of us, it's really not a secret anymore. Anybody who has not been to Red Zeppelin on Perkins Road in Baton Rouge, you're truly missing out. The best environment, the best service, and the best pizza in the state of Louisiana. Go to Red Zeppelin today. Tell them the State of Freedom sent you.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Any follow-up actions, resources, and links to our sponsors will be in the show notes. All calls to action can be taken at lacag.org. That's LACAG.org.
To learn more about our work, become a monthly subscriber, supporter, or advertiser at freedomstate.us. The State of Freedom, the #1 conservative podcast in Louisiana.